people came in as they liked. Again, welcome. Right here,
Yep.
stay in one spot, can't move around. So tonight, I'd like to welcome you to the first of 3 events at College of New Rochelle for our Autism Education Week. The 2 evening events, tonight's event and tomorrow night's event with Dr. Ram Kairam, are really organized by the School of Arts and Sciences faculty, and we're doing this as a lead-up to the event on Friday run by the Graduate School, the symposium. So I'm sure as you came in, you heard that there is this full-day event. So if you want some more information about what is going on with grad school, feel free to talk to us. We're going to have light refreshments after, as soon as our panelists give the nod that they want cookies. So let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Jennifer Scurro. I'm the Associate Professor of Philosophy and Chair of Philosophy and Religious Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences. I'm here tonight first and foremost for the sake of my students in philosophy of education. Okay. And they are our future educators. They're taking on challenges and the risks of a service profession. And they are our first line of defense against social and political biases of class, race, gender, able-bodiedness, and that operate in our many public and private institutions. Linda Ware, an author we just discussed, in her first lines of a piece she called Writing, Identity, and the Other, Dare We Do Disability Studies? She argues, quote, cultural perceptions of disability do not emerge in a vacuum. They accrue slowly over time, informed by normalizing discourses in medicine and psychology, and reinforced by institutions and unchallenged beliefs in deficiency and need. Historically, disability has been the domain of the biological, social, and cognitive sciences that shape and practice education, rehabilitative medicine, and social work. To this, she argues, that critical special education provides an increasingly sophisticated range of issues beyond behaviorism. And when unexamined attitudes, beliefs, and assumptions about disability are challenged, multiple perspectives prove more useful than any one field's perspectives. This is particularly important for teacher educators who seek to interrupt the contradictory subtexts in pedagogy and practice, when special education's core concerns of cure, care, and remediation are contrasted with reflection, transgression, and emancipation that lie at the center of liberatory praxis. I hope this sets the tone for some of the real power of critical disability studies, but the context for which multiple perspectives is inherently educative and important to the work of autism advocacy. That said, to my philosophy of education students, take your notes. You have your notes out? You ready?
Yeah.
I would like to introduce Dr. Bruce Zealand, Associate Professor of Education and Chair of the Education Department. She's been my co-coordinator for these evening events. Her commitment to teacher education, to the principles of aesthetic education, and her knowledge of special education is inspiring and amazing. With Dr. Ishita Kemka, who works at the Center, who's worked at the Center for Opportunities and Outcomes for People with Disabilities at Teachers College at Columbia University, about to start her new position at St. John's University. So glad you're here in New York. Is here now, and we'll be introducing our speaker tomorrow night. And deserves a great thanks for helping us coordinate this series of events to cover the many dimensions of autism education. I want to thank both of them so very much for their work and support. And it's all in the spirit of true collegiality. So thank you. There's so many other people I have to thank just to even get started. Amy Myers, who's not here, but is going to be here tomorrow. Social work. She's the assistant professor of social work, along with the faculty in education. To Vera, to the many students, Sarah, Genevieve, Christine. Those who worked in education and service majors in the School of Arts and Sciences. Thank you for your willingness to assist us in our efforts here tonight. We could have not moved this programming forward without the invaluable support of our Dean in the School of Arts and Sciences, Dick Thompson.
He's right here.
Who's right outside.
Wait a minute. And you can give him a big round of applause.
Yes?
Here we go. Great.
His support has been, and in his office, especially Gina and Barbara have been really so helpful in getting this off the ground, and of course our Provost, Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dorothy Esperano. She and along with the President, Judith Huntington. The support here at the college is really going to make, I think, what we do here revolutionary, and we have a lot of good things to look forward to as we move forward in this kind of programming. Now, to our panel. Tonight we're hearing on not only your relationship to autism, but also about your advocacy, your position from advocacy. So what I would like to do is give the floor to each of our panelists, talking about their relationship to autism, how they identify, and then, of course, having the panel talk again, and I'll come up and I'll ask a few questions, but advocacy, what they see in terms of future autism advocacy. Lydia Brown comes to us from Georgetown. She is a sophomore there. So she comes from DC, she just came up on Amtrak. She had to miss her Arabic class to join us, which I think is...
And wrote a paper on the train.
Wrote a paper on the train. What she lends us on this panel tonight is the voice of the autistic advocate. She's not as much blogs, but writes position papers on her site, autistichoyabut.com. If you want to know more about how to avoid ableist language, the significance of the semantics of person-first language, or the dangers of misrepresentation of autism and autistic persons, she is a resource for you. In her piece, called The Culture of Shame, she insightfully asks, what have we told our children about disability? Finding many ways in which we speak about disability and autism in particular in our culture is often impoverished and unrepresentative, and Lydia is a clear and thoughtful voice. Lisa Quiñones Fontanez. She, as she describes it, secretary by day, grad student by night, and warrior mommy around the clock. On her blog, autismwonderland.com, she chronicles her experiences of raising, loving, and caring for her son, Norin. Her bravery comes through in her advocacy as she narrates the struggles of finding a place for understanding and accepting autistic children. She's recently posted on how she admires her son's innocence, and recently argued, hearing "I'm sorry" when I tell people that Norin has autism has been something I've gotten used to. And I respond, don't be, my son's fine. I know people often don't know what to say, and I certainly don't expect people to give me a high five. But there's no need to say that you're sorry when I can give you 1,000 reasons why you don't need to be. And I'm going to give you my top 5. And if you want to know what that top 5 is, take a look at Babel.com and her other blogs that she posts for.
Very good.
Marjorie St. Clair is a New Rochelle resident, mom, school psychologist. Chelsea's here. Marjorie has been recently working with adolescent students with 2 populations, autism and oppositional defiance disorder. She works with non-resident, resident students. Her experience has often been seeing different populations of students with competing needs. Her advocacy comes in her devotion to working across the lines and communicating with parents, teachers, administrators for the sake of the student. Her commitment is always to see what's best in the student, and at every turn never reducing the student to an assessment of behavior and skills. Finally, Edie Barish. If you live in New Rochelle and you have a preschool child, oh yes. Thank you. No, thank you. If you live in New Rochelle, if you have a preschool child with an IEP, you know Edie. As the chair of CPSC, Committee on Preschool Special Education, she has been steward to many a meeting with our local parents, service providers, teachers, many of the stakeholders involved in the work of special education. As an early childhood special educator, educational leader, and former adjunct instructor in the grad school here at CNR, welcome back. As a parent of an adult child with autism and an active member of SEPTA, the New Rochelle chapter, Special Education Parent-Teacher Association, we look forward to hearing how you bridge the gaps between parent, educator, administrator, and advocate. So I'd like to initiate our talks really with the work of identification. So Lydia, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'll be happy to do that. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. And what I'd like to start out by saying, sorry, I'm not speaking into the microphone, I'm not audible. I'm sorry. Fixing that problem now. So what I'd like to start out by saying is that I was introduced as bringing to you the perspective of autistic advocacy. And that first word in that phrase is a particularly important one. I am autistic. I am an autistic. That might not sound like a particularly startling statement to you, but from the community and the history that I come from, it is a revolutionary one. The world of disabilities is one in which people tend to speak of person-first language as being the end-all, be-all. That if you do not refer to me as a person with autism, you are disrespecting me and you are claiming that autism is the only defining characteristic of my life. In the autistic community, however, we by and large prefer to call ourselves autistic for much the same reason that I call myself an Asian, or the same reason that I call myself an American. You cannot separate being Asian or American from who I am. You cannot separate being autistic from who I am. It is a political statement for me to say that I am an autistic person. It is not a safe thing for me to say that I am an autistic person, whether that's in my school community or my neighborhood. If I tell people that I am autistic, I open myself up to presumptions of incompetence, or I open myself up to baseless and harmful accusations that I'm going to become violent. When I was in 10th grade, I was falsely accused of planning a school shooting. When I tell people that I am autistic, I open myself up to being questioned about incredibly intrusive and invasive things that would not be appropriate to ask somebody who is not autistic. When I tell people that I am autistic in situations of public policy, my voice is roundly dismissed because I am told, well, you only speak for yourself. You only know your own experiences. You don't know anybody else's experience. You don't have the right to speak for anybody else. So sit down, shut up, and let us, the experts, the non-autistics, talk. So when I say that I identify as an autistic person, that is not simply a descriptive statement of a type of person that I am, like saying I have black hair, but it is also a revolutionary political affirmation of a type of identity that I have. I didn't actually always call myself autistic. It's very interesting because in the autistic community, for those of you who are familiar with, for example, the prior diagnostic criteria for autism, there were 3 diagnostic labels that were generally considered to mean that somebody is autistic. There's a couple of problems with that particular way of identifying, but one thing that's been following my entire life, up through this week actually, is the presumption that if someone speaks or if they go to college like me, well, they must just have Asperger's. They're not really autistic. They're very high functioning. And this is a very kind of dismissive way of saying, well, that person's experiences aren't actually valid. They're not legitimate because they appear to us to be able to pass more for neurotypical, or to be able to be considered more within a normative framework of neurological expression, as opposed to folks who are more stereotypically or visibly autistic. And so that type of erasure and delegitimization has been following my entire life because I'm currently a student at one of the top colleges in the country. I travel quite a bit, I write a lot, and people conflate the ability to go to college or the ability to write with you're not really disabled. You don't have a right to talk about disability because that's not who you are. And so when I claim that I am autistic, I am staking a claim on a type of person that I am and refutation to ableist assumptions that to be able to do something, to be accomplished, or to be successful, including in terms that are very much located within our cultural norms, is incompatible with the label of disability. And so when I say that I am autistic, and I am then told that my voice doesn't matter, what that's actually sending a message, what the message that is actually sending is that the voices of people like me don't actually matter. That the voices of people like me are optional. And so when I tell people that I am autistic, I am not merely saying, listen to me, because I actually come from this group of people that you were supposedly talking about, but I am also saying, I come from the group of people that ought to be centered in this conversation. Unfortunately, folks who are privileged by neurotypicality or by able-bodiedness do not usually see those particular lines. And so for them, the assertion that I am autistic is little more than noise outside the window. And when I say that I am autistic, the most common reactions that I get are things like, but you're so high functioning, or I never would have guessed, you seem so normal, or things like, I'm really sorry to hear that, that must suck. And when I say that I am autistic, I am not saying pity me. I am not saying look at how far I've come. None of you know how far I've come, unless you're creepy stalkers and you've been, I don't know, creeper stalking my Facebook a little bit. But the kind of assumption that because I can speak, therefore you must know a lot about me. It actually happened on the train on the way up here today. The woman next to me asked me, what do you do? And I mentioned, well, I'm a student at Georgetown, but I work in disability policy. And she said, what do you do? And I said, well, I work for a nonprofit. And she said, well, which nonprofit do you work for? I said, I work for the Autistic Advocacy Network. And the first question she asked me was, so how did you get involved with that? Do you know somebody who has autism? And I was like, I'm autistic. And then she said, I never would have guessed you seem incredibly high functioning. And I said, you've spoken to me for about 30 seconds. You don't know anything about my life. I'm speaking right now. It doesn't mean I always speak. It doesn't mean I always speak in such a way that communicates to you. And it doesn't mean that I have any of the other markers that you attribute to neurotypicality that's been conflated with health. But this presumption that the only people or the primary people who should be speaking about autism are non-autistic people who happen to know someone who has autism is one that's also followed my entire life. So when I say to people, I am autistic, particularly in a policy-making setting, I am not only asserting the fact that I do not belong to this dominant group of people whose voices and experiences have been privileged, but I am also asserting that I come from a group that has been traditionally marginalized. I am reclaiming that as part of my identity. And so that comes with all sorts of backlash. I have an entire folder in my Gmail inbox for all my hate mail. Not fun, I can tell you that. And this is an experience that is not one that is easy. It is not easy to admit that you belong to a population that is roundly delegitimized and stigmatized in public discourse, whether that's in academia or in the media. But it is necessary because of folks like me, and there are many of us, you can Google autistic people, you can find us, BBC, who are speaking, we can begin to change those conversations from conversations that presume that no autistic people are actually capable of speaking for themselves, either because they're so low functioning they're not capable of forming comments and opinions, or they're so high functioning that they're out of touch with what it really means to be disabled. We can challenge those presuppositions, and we can start to change the tide on what it means when someone says, I am autistic, so that it's no longer simply someone saying they belong to a group that's been horribly disenfranchised and systematically oppressed, but one of self-empowerment and one that represents the community.
Hi, my name is Lisa, and that was, I feel like I learned so much already. I have a 7-year-old son with autism. When he was diagnosed, it'll be 5 years ago next month. I didn't know anyone with autism. I didn't know anyone with a disability. I didn't even know what autism really was until I had to figure it out. I don't claim to be an expert. I write a lot about autism and our day-to-day experience. After my son was diagnosed, I started reading books and memoirs, and all the books I was reading didn't have a voice that I could relate to. I'm a full-time working mom. My husband and I, we have regular jobs. I'm a secretary. He was working for FedEx. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. And these books that I was reading, they talked about moms quitting their careers. They talked about downgrading to smaller houses to afford therapy. And I just could not relate to it because, what could I downsize to living in a 2-bedroom apartment? And I felt like a failure. I felt like my son, could not, and please don't take offense to this, I felt that my son could not get better because I could not afford the best kind of therapy for him. So as a graduate student, I started my blog. I'm getting my Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I started my blog to kind of just share a story and to say, you can work full time, you can have a regular job, you don't have to live in a big house in order to get the services that you need, for your child. I work for attorneys, but none of them were willing to help me. And I really had to study special education law, and I sued the board of ed twice without a lawyer on my own in order to get my son the services that he needs. So that's what I try to share on my blog. I don't claim to be an autism expert. I'm an expert in my son and what he needs.
Hello, my name is Marjorie. Could you hear? Is everyone here?
Is it on? You see green?
Oh.
Hello. Oh, okay.
I didn't want to say that.
Hold on a second. Were our microphones never on? Wait, could you hear me when I was speaking? Okay, just checking. We're incompetent. We apologize.
Hello, my name is Marjorie St. Hilaire, and I pretty much got into this field by accident. My first job was in a mainstream preschool setting, and after working there for a year, there was a sub department that was a special needs department, and I was asked to work there because I was interpreting, because I do speak Creole. I'm from a Haitian background, and there was a student there that was experiencing autism, and I was the person that usually, you know, translated for the special needs department, and that went on for a year, and then I was offered a job. There I was a TA, and after being a TA, and I was going to college, I started doing ABA training in the home, and then eventually became a family counselor where what was being taught in the classroom and all the recommendations that were being done in the school, I was that person who would bridge that strategy and help parents to cope with the different strategies that were recommended from the school. This grew. I started working. I left my position and then went to a program that served all autistic kids from pre-K up to 21. There, I got even more experience where I thought I knew everything. I did not. Because it seems like every kid is an individual, and sometimes I think when you're young, you're just thinking, okay, it's the textbook classification of autism, when in fact, no, every kid is different. Kids manifest their behaviors differently, and so I had to learn to make sure that I individualize the kids' needs and look at their strength. And what I liked is the fact that I had the experience of working with the preschool population where I had to work with both the school and the parent. So I think once I went to the bigger setting, it made it possible for me to work with parents and the teachers in the school. And it has pretty much, the global experience had taught me to pretty much make sure that I interconnect everything that I do with kids. Kids are not learning in isolation. They learn in different settings, across different people, and so therefore I always make it my business to make sure that I'm not only talking to the teachers, I'm talking to the therapists, I'm talking to the psychologists, I'm talking to the OT therapists, I'm talking to the speech therapists. And within my sessions, I make sure to incorporate what is being taught in various disciplines into my session, because I do think they're all connected, and if it's not bridged together, I don't think you could optimize the kids' full potential. And one of the things that I like that she said, and I bad with names, I'm sorry, Lydia, is that you discuss people not viewing you as, you know, being relevant, and that's one of the things that I do is to try to make sure that the kid does have the voice. And so with that being said, today something happened where there was a kid, fully explosive. I'm sitting on the floor with him, with my skirt, and he's saying, get away, and I said, okay, I'm going to get away, but I need to know what I could do for you. Something happened before that. And all the staff members are saying, yo, we need to go, and I'm saying, no. He said, get away. We need to remove ourselves. Now he's saying, well, I'll leave on my own. And I said, okay, so how far do you want me to go? He was like, just keep going further. And I walked back further. And then he started crawling, and everybody's saying, why are you letting him crawl? I said, but you need to listen to what he's telling you. Because the more he starts to trust you, the more he'll be able to have that exchange with you. And so if he's saying to get away, that means you're being intrusive in his space. So we need to respect what he's saying because he's advocating for himself. And so I need to utilize that as a way of letting him know that I hear you. And he crawled up and he eventually stood up and went on the bus. Now, when my staff sees that, they're pretty much looking at me and, oh, you know, I think he's getting away with stuff, and that's not what people do, and we need. And I said, no, I need to do what he needs to get through the day. It's not what you need. I need to go into his world. He doesn't have to come into mine. So with that being said, as you can see, I'm kind of nervous, but that's where I pretty much stand with kids of autism. I really do want to become their voice and help people to pause to see what they want instead of us imposing what we think they should do. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay, well actually, hi, I'm Edie Barish, I've been introduced, and I am the chairperson for the Committee on Preschool Special Education here in our great city of New Rochelle. I am a two-time graduate here at the College of New Rochelle. But I didn't start out this way. I started out as an accountant and got my first degree from my own college. So this is essentially a second career for me. I think after listening to what's been said already, what I'd like to do is, because I really didn't know what I was going to talk about, but I think what I'd like to do is give you a little sense of how the autism business has sort of evolved, and I'm going to use my own personal experiences to demonstrate that. I am the parent of an adult child with autism. My son Lenny is 24 years old. He was actually here on campus once when I was teaching a course, and we used him as a model to share in our session on autism, and it was quite an interesting event to observe Lenny. But again, 24 years ago, when Lenny was first not diagnosed, but first came into my life, you know, he had, you know, seemingly was developing pretty typically, and then all of a sudden at the age of 18 months, we started noticing regression, loss of speech, loss of skills, loss of relatedness, and eye contact and all of that. And of course, you know, the pediatricians in those days thought, well, you know what, I just had another baby. He must be jealous of the new baby, and he's having a hard time adjusting. And I thought, oh, dear God, could that be? So, you know, I would nurse the baby in private and not let Lenny see, and really did everything that I thought I could as a mother to help my son regain the skills that he seemed to lose. At the same time, I just knew, mothers know, I just knew there was more to this. And I started researching, looking up just the symptoms of what I was seeing. And the word for the first time in my life that I'd ever heard or read was autistic. And I said, is that something like artistic? What does that mean? No idea. I'm going back 23 years ago. And in those days, the statistics were significantly less than what the statistics that we hear about now. It was something like 6 in 10,000. And New York State had published this checklist, and there were, I think, 16 items on the checklist, 16 characteristics that one would make reference to, and if your child had 8 of those, they were autistic. And so I would go through that checklist all the time, over and over again. I always made sure Lenny had less than 8. Eventually, it became very clear, and we went through a series of comprehensive evaluations at some of the finest child study centers, including Yale in those days, and lo and behold, the diagnosis was given, Lenny really never regained functional speech. He's a delightful 24-year-old strappy young man who lives in a group home not far, and hence I said I need to do something other than being an accountant. So I left the CPA firm. I came back to school here and changed careers because I needed to do more, not only for my son, but for his peers. Because there were certain, Lenny was, there were certain things that we kind of over time knew he was not going to be able to achieve, like functional speech. But there's lots that he can do. And, but I just, so I can tell you though, that when we first started working with Lenny, there was no such thing, I mean, as full-day preschool programs. Ivar Lovas in UCLA in California was first talking about applied behavioral analysis and some 40 hours of ABA therapy that was necessary, but there were no schools that provided that, and certainly the school districts weren't backing that up. So this, you know, I did a home-based program out of pocket, 28 hours a week to supplement the half-day program that he actually was approved for. So I have to say that the evolution of what is available in schools is it's amazing to realize. Still, and we heard from Lisa earlier, still sometimes it is the parent's job to really fight and to, it shouldn't be a fight, I should take that word back, but to really advocate and actively be involved so that you know what can I do, and it's the school district's responsibility, and that's where I come in now, to be able to say, okay, what does this child need? What are the goals for this child? What does this child need to make progress? And that's really what we look for. We look for progress in all of our students, whether they're general education students or special education students. But that's, so it's just important to know how much we've evolved over time in terms of being able to identify and support our students with autism. In terms of the process that I go through in the school district now, I see hundreds and hundreds of families every year. And I have to tell you that increasingly, over the last 10 years, we hear that word autism. And there are no two autistic folks alike. I think Lydia would agree with me. No two alike. Still, that's you know, the diagnosis, the classification, whatever you want to say. Some of the new changes that maybe we'll talk about a little later will, you know, impact to some extent diagnosis and the provision of services, but in some ways, I think business as usual, as I see it from the school perspective. Adult services is another thing that is a huge challenge for parents, and that also needs to really be thought about and worked on. I mean, beginning with age 16, because adult services with the dwindling resources that we're all feeling from the state level, from the federal level to the state level, down to our personal pocketbooks, the resources and the impact that the economy is placed on there has essentially, in many ways, put a stop on a lot of the development for adult services. And that's really something that's very, very scary, because you know what? As long as the children with adults who are not geared for secondary education, and we're working on that too, but for those students after 21, that's the hard part. When they're in school, the school is responsible. The school will, you know, is supposed to be designing appropriate programs and services to meet the child's needs. But after 21, then what? And that's where it really gets sticky. And that's where parents have to be so diligent in knowing, okay, what do I have to do and when do I have to start? And I can tell you, it's never too soon to start. Because one one of the things that turned out to be lucky for me with my son, Lenny was in the New Rochelle School District through 5th grade 5. After that, everyone sort of agreed that he really was a very high management individual. He needed 24/7 supervision, and the public school felt he really does need now maybe a special school. And so that was the next step. We all agreed. He went to a day school in Somers for about a year and a half. And then at his annual review at that time, consensus was, it's really not enough for him. He needs more of a residential placement. As a single mother with 3 boys at the time, and Lenny being my middle one, I kind of agreed because he did not sleep at night and I was working full time. So it was a challenge, and it was a safety issue. We had deadbolts on our doors, we had anti-climb systems, fencing around the yard. You know, we did everything we could to make sure that he was safe, but still, he eloped, and we needed to really take that into consideration. It was a painful, painful decision to say, okay, my not even 13-year-old is not going off to college, but he's going off to a residential school. I could speak now, not void of emotion, but certainly I have a handle on it, and that was quite a long time ago now. And but that step was not only critical, but it was the door that opened him into adult services, because now he became priority. A priority at a time where resources are a commodity, it was really important. So Lenny is now, as I said, he's 24. He's in an adult group home, happily much closer to home. He goes schlepping up to Northern Dutchess every Sunday for 9 years when he attended school there. Was, but it was well worth it because he got what he needed. He always had my love. He always had the love and support of the rest of his family members. Many times my mother would take her Dramamine to take the long ride with me on Sundays to go visit, and it was really, you know, it's just been an evolution, but I don't want us to lose sight of what happens after school too, because I think that's just as important. Even at that, even though Lenny was in a residential school, getting him into a group home was no easy task. So you have to really, as parents, and even as educators, you have to really be careful and be very thorough. And it's never too soon to think about what's next. And I think at that, I'll stop here, because I'm sure we're going to go into more.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, because I'm not on the video right this moment, I just want to pause for a moment. We have index cards, so if people would like to ask questions, what we're going to do is give you the opportunity to write down your question, and then once we refer to our panel again, they're going to talk for a few minutes about the relationship to advocacy. I asked them beforehand to really think both in terms of the negative difficulties, challenges, obstacles in present advocacy, kind of the political implications of having to take a stand, to take a position, to lay claim, to fight when you don't want to fight, and also the positive. I really ask that everybody think 5 years from now, where are we in terms of future advocacy in the most hopeful sense of what autism advocacy might look like in the future. So take a minute. I think we have some touring around. So we're going to have Edie start us off again, also with what she has about the changes in the diagnosis and some basic description of exactly what the changes are, because the DSM-5 comes out next week. And so the changes are quite significant and impacts autism directly. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't realize I was going to get a break. Okay. Yeah, you know, I'll just touch on the DSM-5, and you know, and I'm not an expert. You know, that's really that's you know, legal and all of that. But I did go to a conference at the end of 2012, and the presenter was an attorney who talked a little bit about the changes. And so, I mean, just in summary, the changes are expected in May, so it's right around the corner. And it really describes the different classifications of autism-related disabilities that were previously recognized. So, you know, your Asperger's and PDD-NOS and Rett's and child disintegrated disorder and all of those that are under one singular autism spectrum disorder. And the criteria for that diagnosis is really based on, you know, there's 3 severity levels, you know, requiring support, requiring substantial support, and requiring very substantial support. So that's essentially what the DSM-5 is going to define. The American Psychiatric Association talks about subcategories, and so all the subcategories of autism spectrum, including Asperger's, PDD, NOS, as I said before, will fall under the broad term. There are 2 categories of symptoms that are used, and not the 3-category system that used to be used. And so it's really just social communication impairment and restrictive repetitive behaviors. And essentially you have to have 3 deficits in social communication and at least 2 deficits in restrictive repetitive behaviors, and then 1 in hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input, and that would fall under the repetitive thing as well. So, and then they also consider genetic causes in the presence of any medical conditions, and also consider will be, and then the other thing is that if you don't fit into any of that, what the diagnosis might be is social communication disorder, and that diagnosis would be considered if there were no repetitive behaviors in the picture. So, and again, I do have a list of some resources that I'll leave out later. You know, if you Google DSM-5 and autism, you can get all of this stuff. So I just wanted to give it an overview of that. Now, what does that mean in terms of services for, say, school-age students? Now, essentially, for preschool-age students, we make determinations on the eligibility, if you will, of preschool-age students to receive special education services based on an evaluation or a comprehensive set of evaluations of the 5 developmental domains that we really examine in preschool-age children. And that would be their communication skills, their social skills, their cognitive skills, their adaptive skills, that's how they use their skills to function in their environments, and their physical development. And if there's a 33% delay in any one of those areas, it doesn't matter if there's a diagnosis. We consider that student a preschooler with a disability. We figure out what the goals are for that child, and we recommend services. So regardless, so DSM-5 is not going to affect preschool services at all, because it's the percentage of delay. And if they present with a 25% delay in 2 or more of those developmental domains, the same is true. They're considered preschoolers with disability, no classification, no diagnosis. It's just that they present with a significant delay and require special education services. That school age may be a little bit different, because when a child becomes kindergarten age, the child now has to fit into one of the nifty 13 categories that the state education department defines, and the one where most of the students that we're talking about tonight would be autism. Under DSM-5, the new DSM, the new regs, or the new criteria and diagnosis, social communication disorder doesn't fit anywhere. So it's yet to be seen, but that's just my observation based on what this means in terms of school-age services. Advocacy. Now, one of the things that I know that I've done and that I always encourage folks to do is get involved. And some of us like to sort of deal with things on our own. We're not groupies. But I have to say that the Special Education Parent-Teacher Association, the PTA, was so very instrumental in terms of helping me not only help myself, help my family, but help other families and reach out. And I think that involvement was one form of advocacy that was sort of a way that we could come together, share resources, get folks to come and speak on topics that were of interest to the families in the community, and that was one, certainly something that I encourage folks to be a part of. And through that organization, I actually co-founded with my co-president at the time the We Are One Awards, the New Rochelle We Are One Awards, where we celebrate every year teachers in each and every one of our school buildings, and we have 10 school buildings in New Rochelle, public school buildings in New Rochelle, many private. And we celebrate those teachers who have been recognized by other staff or parents for their work in terms of trying to bridge the gap between general education and special education students and providing integrated and inclusive opportunities. So, those are just some ways in terms of what parents can do to advocate, is get involved in organizations like that, because they really are meaningful. And I have to tell you, the We Are One Award, we just celebrated our 16th just last week, in fact, at Green Tree, with an attendance of almost 400 people. And I remember the first one, my co-president, she said, let's have a dinner dance. I said, who in heaven's name is going to come to this? And that first year we only had 90, but we're up to 400 attendees at our event, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful affair. But again, that's just part of advocacy. Advocacy is, I think some of the folks to my right will have other ideas in terms of advocacy, but certainly just recognizing what's coming and being proactive about changes, about resources, and about your position, whether it's a parent, an educator, or just somebody who is advocating for themselves. Okay, so later on maybe we'll get some questions and we'll continue. I'm going to turn this over to Marjorie, I guess.
Okay, as far as advocacy, right? I think my role within the school system that I'm in right now, we deal primarily with parents that are of low socioeconomic group, parents who are bilingual, well, I shouldn't say monolingual. And my role is to try and see if I could, let me give you a case. Yesterday I had a parent come in. Her son is on the spectrum. She's dealing with multiple issues at home. She's not sleeping. She wants to remove her son from my placement to a different placement. We had a CSC meeting, and pretty much mom she came in around 10 o'clock. The meeting was around 1 o'clock. I had to sit with mom with all the paperwork. I had my report, 3-page psycho counseling report. I had the speech therapy report. I had the behavior plan, the FBA. There were multiple documents, which I knew could not be covered at that meeting. And so what we did is make sure she came in ahead of time. We reviewed all the report with her verbatim. I had another person with me, and she pretty much reviewed all the report, got her input. What did she think? Does she think there's something that needs to be added or subtracted? And then eventually, by the time the meeting came, mom was versed on what to expect. And I think that's my role in advocacy, is to make sure that the parents have a voice. especially parents that are not well educated, not well versed in the diagnosis, although they are, living with a child with autism, but I don't think they know how to advocate for themselves, and so that's where I try to come in to make sure that the parents is aware. I make sure that the parent know that I'm calling the psychologist, I'm calling the social worker, this is what we're working on, this is what do you think? Always getting the input from the mother and also getting the input from the child, since he's the one that is experiencing, everyday challenges. And so my advocacy is in that matter. I try to advocate. What's really good about my advocacy is that there's not a lot of people in my district that really fully understand autism. So all the kids that are on the spectrum come to me, and so all the students are pretty much, I take them under my wings, and I do a lot of things. So I'm able to, within my sessions, get a grasp on some of the challenges that they experiencing, and I'll have a student tell me, as a matter of fact, I have a meeting tomorrow, where a student is complaining that the noise level is too loud. And I emailed the teacher, she's saying, yes, we're going to address it, but it's still happening. So tomorrow, myself, the teacher, and the student will meet together, and we're going to devise a plan together. So that's the type of thing that I try to do to advocate for the student and make sure that the parents is involved. So I'm the whole child. I take things from a whole child perspective, and I don't, again, it will always be my emphasis that we have to look at all areas, and that's one thing that schools need to start doing, is to make sure that all disciplines are included in the child, including the mother, including the child, and including whatever other supports that she's getting. So that's my goal as far as advocacy.
I advocate in a few different ways. When Norman was first diagnosed, I remember my mother telling me, my mother's a very old school Puerto Rican woman, and she's very much about don't put your business out in the street. So when Norman was diagnosed, I remember her telling me, you don't have to tell anyone that he has autism, you just keep that to yourself. And at that time, I'm dating myself, I was on MySpace, and I told myself diagnosed with autism, and I received all of this support. And then I realized I had to advocate for his services, because you go into these meetings, and if you have a typically developing child, you can pick a school that you like and send them. When you have a child with a disability, you have to discuss it with a committee. And it's this group of strangers who have just read or maybe skimmed a 5 to 10 page report about your child, and they're the ones who want to kind of take charge, and it's easy to feel as if you don't have a say. By nature, I'm very mild-mannered, I'm not very outspoken, I'm non-confrontational, but I learned quickly that I had to be that squeaky wheel. I had to make noise. I had to, call 2 or 3 or 10 times in order to make sure I got the meeting. And I really had to walk into these meetings prepared and know that I remember for our first meeting, I forgot what they said, but they said something that I knew was wrong, and I said, well, actually, on page 5, on line 6, it says, and they were kind of taken aback because I don't think they expected me to memorize it the way that I did. I've had to advocate, for Lauren with my own friends and family, who don't understand what really autism is. There was an incident where we were kicked out of a friend's home because my son had done something that they felt could have been avoided. And I remember my friend saying, well, it's the 3rd time that it's happened. He has to know better. And this was someone I was very close to, and it surprised me because this person had known, my son Norn for so long, and to get that, to realize that my best friend didn't even understand Norn and what his disability was. It was really hard, and I had to take him aside, and I said, look, this is not the kind of kid that will get things on the first, second, or third time. He's not, and I really had to explain what autism was and what kind of kid Norn was. I'm also very active in social media. I'm on Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram. I'm everywhere. And there was I was on Twitter last year, and the great thing about the autism community is that when somebody attacks somebody with autism, like all these people come out and are just come out in droves against this person. So 50 Cent had tweeted something to one of his followers and insulted him by saying, oh, what are you, autistic or something, implying that the person was stupid. So Holly Robinson Pete wrote this long letter, to 50 Cent, saying that, she's really disappointed in him. And then I posted a picture on my Facebook page of Norn with a caption that said, Yo 50, if you think autism makes me stupid, meet me at 3 o'clock, I'll school you. And that picture just really went viral, and it exploded, and people were sharing it, and people were talking about it, and all these parents were retweeting it and tweeting him, and eventually he apologized. And I thought it was just so powerful that this community came out and spoke against a celebrity, and he's not the first celebrity that has insulted or use the word autistic, as an insult, or even the R word. It's another word that I'm really against. And when celebrities use that kind of language in social media, people come out and they speak their mind and they talk about it. So I think for me that's one of the most exciting things, because I want to change the perception of what autism is and the stigma behind it. And I think social media is a very powerful way to do that.
Oh, are you done? Sorry. I didn't realize because people were applauding for everybody else. And awkward moments. I think, okay, so I could sit here and tell you the very many different things that I've been doing over the last several years. In 2011, I served on the Adult Services Subcommittee to my state. I'm from Massachusetts, the statewide Autism Commission. As I mentioned earlier, I work on staff for the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. I also serve on a couple of other boards and councils, both locally in DC, and that's really loud. Both locally in DC and nationally, I regularly travel to present at different conferences on issues related to autistic identity, autistic culture, and disability politics and policy. My website is Autistic Hoya, www.autistichoya.com. If you want the pretentious biography, it's on the About page. It's like 4 paragraphs long. It's really pretentious. There's actually a note at the top that says, note to self, remember to write something not pretentious and put here. So if you want the pretentious bio, you can go there. Be my guest. I know that most of you have smartphones and can do that now. I promise I won't judge you. Although I will think you're a creep. Not judging. I think that there are a lot of really important issues that have to do with advocacy, and as I was alluding to earlier, one of the most important of those has to do with voice. You just heard from 3 people, all of whom, to my knowledge, are not autistic, have not identified themselves as such. They are either parents, or they are professionals, or they are both. And these are the kinds of people who, by and large, in the autism community, have the dominant position when it comes to advocacy or when it comes to having conversations about autism. And as I mentioned earlier, it's so frequent that when actually autistic people wish to be involved in these conversations, whether that's occurring at the individual level, or whether that's occurring on a more systems change policy advocacy level, are excluded from the conversation or are essentially patted on the head and told, that's really nice, you have an opinion, now sit down. The final report of the Massachusetts Statewide Autism Commission was just released last month on March 27th. 2 years late after it was supposed to be released, and the appendices to this report were the individual reports of each of the subcommittees, and I mentioned I served on the Adult Services Subcommittee. I was one of 6 autistic people to serve on this committee. And the note at the beginning of our subcommittee's report mentioned, we were very fortunate to have several self-advocates on the panel who offered their own unique perspectives, end quote. On the surface, to somebody who's not familiar with that type of language, that might sound like a neutral, possibly even positive statement. To me, it was a blow into the stomach, because the implication in that sentence was, oh, those people, they have their opinions, that's really sweet of them, now let's get on to the real things. I know for a fact that that is true, not merely because I'm reading into the tone, but because I was present in every single one of those meetings. And in one of those meetings, when I uttered 2 words out of my mouth, not profane words, totally normal words, before I could even say anything farther, the person who was sitting next to me, who is not autistic, interrupted me and started screaming at me for daring to speak. I served on that committee. She screamed at me for probably a good 2 minutes, during which everyone else in the room just sat there and stared. At the time, I was 17. I wasn't even an adult, I was the youngest person in the room. Everyone there knew that I was autistic. Those of you who are familiar with autistic folks probably know, and ought to know, that yelling at autistic people is a really, really bad idea. It tends to trigger us into shutting down and sometimes lashing out and attacking in fear, anger, and panic. It is a bad idea. And everyone in that room had some connection to autism. There were the other autistic people, there were a lot of parents, there were a lot of professionals. They sat there and watched as the parent of an autistic person screamed at me for daring to open my mouth in a meeting of a committee that I sat on as a member. And after she was done, they sat there in silence for about 30 seconds. The chairs moved on. They didn't acknowledge it. And a week later, someone had the gall to come up to me in a hallway and say, you know, I'm really sorry for what happened to you last week. That really wasn't okay. And I said, why didn't you say so then? You had ample opportunity. And the reason for that is because of the power imbalance that privileges the voices of those who are not autistic over those of us who are. When we are asked to speak, 99% of the time we are asked to do so in terms of what is called a self-narrative Zoom exhibit. And what that means, it's a phrase that was coined by one of the pioneers in our community, is that we are expected to speak specifically and only about our personal experiences of what it's like to live with autism. So how does that affect you on a daily basis? When were you diagnosed as a child? What was it like for you in school? Now, I'm not morally opposed to that kind of discussion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The problem arises because that is the only public role that is considered acceptable for an autistic person to have. And once we start talking about politics, or philosophy, or policy, or services, we're told to sit down and shut the hell up because we don't know what we're talking about. Just stick to your own story. The abolitionist activist Frederick Douglass was treated in much the same way. When he first spoke on the abolitionist circuit, he frequently spoke about his personal experiences with what it was like to be a slave, how he had experienced slavery, what things he had witnessed as a child growing up in slavery, his personal life story. And when he decided he wanted to start talking about the politics and the philosophy of abolitionism and the movement to end slavery, the white abolitionists, who were the primary voices and the people in positions of structural power in the movement, told him, stick to your own personal story, leave the philosophy to us, we know what we're talking about. That's the same kind of thing that happens on a regular basis in the autistic community. This Monday I learned from my university that a sorority that in fact was founded to empower Black women, is hosting an event in which they are co-sponsoring with the organization Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks is an organization that does not have a single autistic person on its board, does not have a single autistic person anywhere in its actual leadership. They have one autistic person on one of several external advisory boards that hold no decision-making power whatsoever. And this is an organization that is purported to represent autistic people. Not only are their goals and philosophies in direct contravention to the things that most autistic people actually want for ourselves, which are equal opportunity and access, whether that's in education, employment, housing, or otherwise, but they are an organization that absolutely does not represent the voices of autistic people whatsoever. And when I deign to point this out over email, both to that particular organization and to an organization that I am part of that was supporting this event, today, on my way to this event tonight, I received emails in which I was roundly dismissed and delegitimized as that's just her personal opinion. We're going to support this organization anyway. One of the emails even said, and I quote, because we're supporting all organizations that represent marginalized people. What part of Autism Speaks represents autistics? They are an organization that pours a lot of money into research that's aimed ultimately at research into the etiology of autism with the ultimate goal of looking for a cure for autism. For those of us who are autistic, what this means is the elimination of people who are like us, whether that's now or sometime in the distant future. That is not a goal that most of us want. We want equal opportunity, we want equal access. The way to solve the problems that we face in our daily lives, whether those are severe and compounded or whether those are relatively mild, is not to erase the ways in which our brains work, but rather just to erase the societal barriers that disable us. That is not what Autism Speaks wants. Autism Speaks has done nothing to speak out against abusive practices. I am working currently, I have been working for several years in advocacy around a particular issue of a place called the Judge Rotenberg Center. I'm from Massachusetts, as I mentioned. The Judge Rotenberg Center is a residential institution in my home state. It is the only institution in the entire United States that uses painful electric shock as a punishment for disabled youth, including autistic youth. The philosophy of treatment they hold as an extreme form of behavior is in the style of Ivar Lovaas. What this philosophy of behaviorism, this particular strain of it, dictates is that in order to eliminate or reduce unwanted or undesirable behavior, whether that's something that might actually be dangerous, such as harming oneself to the point of near death, or harming other people, or whether it's something that's simply inconvenient or atypical, like flapping my hands, or making involuntary vocal tics, which I'm sure many of you are doing. How many of you are tapping your leg right now? And to eliminate this behavior simply because they're inconvenient or atypical, solely for the purpose of indistinguishability. The goal of it is so that the person looks and acts as normal as possible, solely for appearance, solely for cosmetics, solely for, there's a word for it that I'm blanking on, form, as opposed to function. That is what their philosophy is. That institution has been open since 1971, and despite numerous legal challenges, both through litigation, regulation, and the law, remains open to this day. That is an institution that parents will send their children to because they claim that it is saving their children's lives, because of the propaganda that they spew out, that torture in the name of treatment is fine, because we're just trying to make your child become better. When who defines better? When better is defined simply as looking more normal, speaking, looking you in the eye, that doesn't mean much to us. If I look you in the eye or if I don't look you in the eye, that is absolutely no measure of whether I'm happy with my life. If I look you in the eye or if I don't look you in the eye, that is absolutely no measure of whether I understand my schoolwork or not. If I look you in the eye or if I don't look you in the eye, that is absolutely no measure of whether I can wash myself or not. But these cosmetic behaviors are the ones that are focused on by the predominant forces in treatment and therapy, as opposed to treatment or therapy that focus on actual functional skills. It's out there, but that is not the predominant model of treatment. The vast majority of providers of services such as ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, are at least unscrupulous in their marketing, if not in their actual practices. And that in order to become an ABA practitioner, to become a board-certified behavior analyst, you do not have to receive any sort of ethics training, never mind any actual form of education in which you're actually speaking to the members of the population whom you purport to be serving. And so, even people with the absolute best of intentions who believe that they are helping the children that they are serving engage in practices that have left many of my adult friends who are subjected to ABA with PTSD from ABA. Because ABA done in the style of Lovaas, which focuses on this philosophy of indistinguishability, only confirms and reinforces the message that we are not okay as we are, that it is not acceptable to speak, think, move, or communicate in naturally autistic ways simply because they are atypical and abnormal. And that therefore, the only measure of success, improvement, progress, or getting better is how more neurotypical we can see. The kind of advocacy that I focus on in my writing, in my policy advocacy, in my professional work on my campus and elsewhere, is aimed not simply at making the world a better place for me, but it is aimed at making the world a better place for the generation that's going to come after me. I grew up in a world that told me I was broken for who I was. When I was first diagnosed as autistic, I was told, don't tell people you're autistic, they'll use it against you and make fun of you. When I've told teachers and professors that I am autistic, I've been accused of faking, of making excuses. I've been accused of just saying that to cover up being lazy. In other cases, I've been patted on the head and told, oh, well, that's really good, and then patronized for the rest of the time that I had to be around that person because I was presumed to be incompetent, incapable of forming rational thought or opinion, much less engaging in intellectual conversation and discourse, because of the fact that my brain is wired differently than yours. And so I don't want my children to grow up in a world where their parents and their friends and themselves are going to be told to hate them for who they are, and that in order to fit in with the world, they have to change who they are and at least how they act so that they look like other people solely for the purpose of form, not for the purpose of function. That's the kind of advocacy that I work on. Now, what my university could be doing, what I'm grateful for the small steps the student government is doing, is attempting to challenge the societal preconceptions of what it means to be disabled and how to address the problem of disability. I was just appointed for a term for the next year in the executive branch of my school government as the Undersecretary of Disability Affairs. And what I am currently doing with the diversity department of the cabinet of student government is working on a number of policies and programs that will seek to empower and support disabled students and other members of the community in a way that affirms that it is okay to be different. It is okay to have a mind or a body that's divergent or deviant from that of the typical model. And yet that also affirms that by very nature of the label of disability, one might function in different ways that may require support in a world that is essentially not built around the ways in which we function. That's the kind of work that I am working on now. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of work that is acknowledged. If it's someone's name who is a good autistic, a well-behaved autistic, who sticks to being a self-narrating zoo exhibit and sticks to the predominant narrative of autism as a medical condition that ought to be ameliorated through therapy, your name gets attached to this, the media will be all over that. Your name will be in the press all the time. If you instead seek to challenge that predominant paradigm, if you instead seek to undercut that, to challenge the notion that disability must necessarily be a health problem as opposed to a societal one, your name's not going to be out there. People are not going to know who you are. They won't respect your work because when you tell them, I'm working for a world for equal rights and I don't want to be cured, they're not going to hear equal rights. They're going to hear not want to be cured, and they're going to say, that's horrible. Why would you not want to cure someone with this horrible disease? Well, if you're me, or someone like me, to be told there's something wrong with you, to be told that the criteria to define you as you are is a list of deficits, tell me that's not dehumanizing. Tell me that's not creating further attitudinal and social barriers to a world in which myself, and people like me have equal rights. It's the kind of advocacy that I'm doing, and it's the kind of advocacy that I invite people to join with me, and unfortunately most people who purport to be allies don't take up very well of that model. They follow in the steps of organizations like Autism Speaks on the misguided presumption that, well, it's an organization that says autism in the name, so they must do good things to benefit people, without actually examining the rhetoric that Autism Speaks uses, or the way in which it impacts the lives of autistic people, or the ways in which autistic people, some more eloquent than I, have spoken out about how that type of rhetoric actually harms our community, actually contributes to a world in which we can be murdered and our murderers be exculpated by a justice system that devalues our lives. And so, for those of you who are interested in actually being allies to the autistic community, those of you who want to support autistic people, to empower autistic people, to break down those barriers that permit and justify widespread abuses, I ask you to consider whose voices are you listening to when people are talking about autism.
Can I just respond to that?
Please do. And then after you do, and after other members of the panel wish to do that, we'll open it up for questions and comments.
Yeah, okay. I mean, firstly, I really want to, I don't have to say this to you, but I really want to say that Lydia's voice is a voice that I would like to continue hearing over and over again, and I think should be heard. I think that this ties, it dovetails into what I spoke about earlier in terms of how autism and our perspective and how everything has evolved. And I think a lot of these organizations, like Autism Speaks, and there was Dan and all this other stuff that, and it really came out of the earlier notions that autism meant those folks did not have a voice, and that autism, and that's part of the reason why the numbers were so significantly smaller 20 years ago, because that autistic spectrum disorder was much narrower. And so I think that it's important, I think that we should pay attention to what Lydia is saying in terms of, yes, we do need to consider all of that, and those voices do need to be not only heard, but they do need to be an integral part of those advisory boards and decision-making teams and part of all that. And I think that, again, the earlier perspectives, when parents were given diagnoses for their children who were essentially, who did not have voices for themselves, they really felt like what they needed to do was fix them. And I think a lot of parents still have that. I mean, parents sit across the table from me all the time in tears. They're shattered because they heard that word. And I think that what they have to do is also hear the kind of words that Lydia's voice and autistic people in general can really share, because it's very important. But I think it really does speak to the evolution, because 20 years ago, and that's where that, I mean, I can only go back that long because that's when I first even heard of the word, but it was very, very different. And I think that we have to be very, very mindful of where we are now and really listen. And something that she talked about was competence. And I have experience in the district with a young man who is currently in college. He is nonverbal, but he is autistic, and he is extremely skilled in terms of his academics. I think he passed most of his high school regions with, 90-something and up to 100s and everything. Really a very confident young man. He uses facilitated communication to work for him. I'm not saying it works for everybody, and I'm not advocating for that, but he uses facilitated communication to write his papers, to communicate with others, and that is his quote, and something that he shared with the folks who were helping him plan for college was think competence.
Okay, so the microphone is on. I'm sure you have a lot of comments or questions. And it's nice that this is such a small group so that we can share. So,
I have
your
two
cards.
questions.
Okay.
My first question is, when your son reached the age that could not be in the school system anymore, did the government help you to send him to the special school? I mean, with funding?
Well, nobody says, oh, miss, come here, let me help you. But I have to say, and this is all part of advocacy that should be taking place in the school systems. And I can only speak for New Rochelle, and we do have teams of folks who help guide you through that process. I mean, it starts very early. We have what we call transition fairs every year, where parents can come in, and we have agencies, county and state agencies, as well as colleges, to kind of share the possibilities and the steps. And it's a long process. It's a process in terms of obtaining the student's benefits in terms of disability, Medicare, Medicaid, and all of that. It's a long process. It's not easy. It's not fun, not for the student or for the family. But yeah, there is help out there. It's knowing what to do, and it's being in touch with the folks in your school district and insisting that they help you navigate that, because it's not easy to navigate. But that is really, it's there. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the development of services in terms of additional group homes, additional workplaces is, a lot of that work has stopped over the last 5 or 6 years because of the cuts and the economic condition that the country is in. And so, and you're reading about that now in terms of Medicaid, and it's not a pretty thing, but it is out there. But you have to work for it, and you have to be in touch with the right folks and work with your school district, because it's really important. And the school district does have a responsibility to guide you, at least.
You can also come to Washington and chill with me as we work to try to change policy. It's really, really fun, StarCast. I'm reading through hundreds of page-long reports in acronymies. It's fun.
It's true. And we did my, I did with my other sons, we rallied in Albany. We did all of those kind of group things to show support and to work with our senators and beg for continued funding, et cetera, et cetera. And those rallies are going on right now again, because now there's significant cuts being expected, with Medicaid and the provision of services for disabled adults.
My other point is, I'm from Ghana, and of course, it took a while for that word autism to even come up here. So you could imagine in third world countries, when I was growing up, I would see children who were autistic. Now I know, because I have a master's in education. I had to learn about special ed. But thinking back, these children were called water or river children. And some of them will be killed because they did not know. And we've come this far with education. Parents are learning to give their children the best. I live with someone in my building, and yes, I stop her every day to say hello. She doesn't look at me, but she says hello back. And she's almost 15. I've known her for 9 years now. And she's learning so much, and I respect her so much. I try to, understand, but I can't. We can't. All we have to do is just be there for them. I spent almost 30 minutes on the phone with someone who works in the nursing home for a boy who wants to volunteer his time. And he had to go through so much. So she was asking me all these questions. Well, but is he going to be harmful to others? I said, no. You just have to show him what to do, and he'll do it. He's helping older people. He likes to be around people. Oh, but I don't think he has some, social skills. I said, just try him. If he doesn't work out, you try it. So when his father called me, what did you say to the lady? He got the job. I said, thank God. Because, it's like we have to give people a chance. And the labels, and it hurts me so much that we've come this far. And I hope to go home soon to put in use what I have learned. And unfortunately, I can't be here on Friday to go through the whole day event. But I'm learning, and I want to take more classes before I go, to start something. I know there's something in place already, but to add my voice to it, to let everybody know that they're all God's children, and they have so much to offer. Only if we spend time with them, listen to them. The musical talent, and we watch TV and movies, and we see what autistic children can do. But when they're close to us, it's like we can't acknowledge them. And it's really sad. So I applaud you, especially my friend here, Lydia.
By the way, you speak Twi?
I speak Twi.
I'm an IEP teacher, and I work in the New York City school system. I'm not part of Westchester, and what we're encountering more and more is lack of programs for these students. And it's very frustrating to sit on a committee and then have to tell the parents, well, we don't have placement, or there's no placements available, and these doors are constantly being closed on these parents and families. And it's just extremely frustrating. Any suggestions, any advice, or what we can do?
Where are you exactly?
I'm an IEP teacher.
No, where, like, geographically?
In the Bronx.
Because there's a very, so for example, I know that there's a very active and large chapter of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in New York.
Can I just say something? I'm sorry, maybe I need to clarify this.
Oh.
If a child is severely autistic, we have no problems. It's the midway, the children that are not quite severe enough to be, and they're not quite bright enough to fit in, and they're not, it's extremely frustrating.
It's, if I can address that, it's the school district's responsibility to create programs and develop, if the child has a disability, and develop an educational program that meets the child's needs, that addresses the child's strengths, the child's weaknesses, and provides appropriate services to meet the child's needs. You know, I can't speak for the Bronx or for New York City. It's way too big for me to even honestly.
No, we're dealing with what's called the new reform.
And part of that is probably a spin-off from the new mandate that became effective July of 2012, and that's response to intervention. Now, with response to intervention, simply stated, before, just because a student has a diagnosis, whether it be autism or you name it, ADHD, it doesn't really matter. Just because a student has a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that that student is educationally handicapped. And, so that's the first thing to consider. So it doesn't mean that the child needs a special program. The child may need some accommodations. The child may need, whether it be preferential seating or certain things, an escort to go through the building. It may need accommodations, but not necessarily a special program. With response to intervention, we're looking at students before we classify them and say, wait a minute, what can the school district do? Every building should have the ability to pool its resources, to work with children before we classify them and say that they have an educational disability. So that could be what the reform you're talking about is response to intervention, which means that the building has to say, where's the area of need, where's the child failing, and what research-based intervention can we do to help this child acquire that skill. I don't know if that's the reform you're talking about.
These are clearly defined, clearly autistic. A child who clearly has autism, and we are having difficulty finding placements.
There are also laws that say that if the school district does not have a program that is suitable to meet the goals and objectives for that student, that the family has the right to find a program outside of the school district that's a state-approved program.
Can a parent go out on their own?
The New York State Education Department maintains a list of approved programs that are out-of-state placements that students can go to with state funding. If the parent or of the student can prove that their own district is inadequately able to serve the child.
So my experience was Norrin went to a public school for kindergarten, and it was supposed to be this special class within this regular, typical public school for children with autism, and he was supposed to get speech therapy and occupational therapy while there. He started, and I was assured that there would be an OT at the school. When we started, I said, hey, where's the OT? We don't have an OT yet, and I kept getting the runaround. So after 3 weeks, writing, and I was documenting everything. I was sending emails, I was writing in the notebook and inquiring, and the assistant principal finally told me, look, this is the Bronx, OTs are limited, I don't know what to tell you, call 311. I had everything documented, and I think it was, my husband was working, he's a court officer now, so he went into Ruben Diaz, he was able to go into Ruben Diaz's office and kind of talk to someone, and I sent an email, and eventually I got a meeting. I had to sit in a room with 12 other people to kind of get the letter, the letter to get OT services.
Oh.
And at the time I was paying because I knew how critical OT was for him. So I was paying $150 a week. I wound up spending over $1,000 within 2 months because the DOE wasn't providing OT services. And then after that meeting, I was able to get the letter. And then a few months later, I decided, you know what, I spent $1,000 of my money. I'm going to sue the district and I'm going to get the money back. So that's when I filed it for an impartial hearing, and I went to court and I got the money back. But because I had documented everything, like from the first day of school, by the time June came around and I had the annual meeting, and they were going to keep him in that probe, even though the teacher didn't want him on the first day of school, she said, I can't teach your son. How is he going to learn if he can't sit still? That was the first half day of school. That's how we started the year, and it just got progressively worse. You know, Norm would cry every single morning. It was the worst year of our lives. So by the time June came and we had the annual meeting, I documented everything. I did everything in email. I would read receipts on emails, and if they didn't respond back, I would note, sent this email, didn't respond back. If I made a phone call and they wouldn't return it, I kept a log of everything. And that really was my ammunition to go and say at the end of the year, this was not the appropriate placement for him. You don't want him here. But even though he had failed every single class, he failed kindergarten, basically. And they were willing to promote him to the first grade, just so that I wouldn't pull him out. But I said, no, this isn't our place. We're not doing this again next year. And because I had documented everything all along, I was able to get the MPS letter at the end of the year. So I would just, tell the parent, document everything, and research. Now he's at a non-public school placement. The school goes until he's 21. It's the best thing that's ever happened. But you have to be the squeaky wheel. You have to keep calling. You have to send emails. You have to, I was writing letters almost every other week, and I was CCing everybody, Ruben Diaz, Dennis Walcott, and that's when I would get, a response back, and they would say, oh, you don't have to CC that person, and I would think, well, clearly I do, because if I don't CC anyone, no one's calling me back, no one's writing me back. So that's what I would do. So just be annoying.
I just want to add that it's very awkward for a teacher to be caught in the middle, because as a teacher, you're an employee of a district, and the district does not want you to go against district policy and say, oh, by the way, you should sue. It's not really appropriate, and yet many teachers will put themselves on the line and say, I'll help you advocate, just don't use my name. And it's a shame that it has to be that kind of system rather than everybody working for the good of the needs of the child.
Hi. This is slightly directed at everyone, but kind of a little bit towards Edie. I've been working in the Rochelle preschools for quite a few years, and the position that I kind of feel uncomfortable is, and I've had this a few times, so we have kids, we have children that are clearly on the spectrum, and it becomes an issue of kind of dealing with the parent, because you get a lot of parents that don't want to hear teachers or the preschool, and it's not anything negative against the children, it's that we want them to get the services that they need. And we're not necessarily equipped to provide them, and especially when we're understaffed and barely, you know how Rochelle preschool, a lot of us barely meet ratio as is. And then when you've got children who clearly need services and take up, you know, 1 or 2 teachers, you know, I mean, it's pulling teachers out of the classroom, but I just don't know like what you would suggest there. What
personal response? Part of that is the result of policy problems, in that, for example, budgets toward education in general, and in particular budgets for disability services, have faced enormous amounts of cuts repeatedly over the last several years. And so in terms of the policy side of this, and that's where I really do a lot of work as a policy advocacy, I would encourage you as employees, you as people who work at a school, as well as parents in your community and autistic adults in your community, whoever is interested and has a stake in this particular battle, you know, to actually be able to have adequate and quality services available, to lobby the state legislature. It's New York, so it would be, I believe, the New York Assembly, to make it known that in the yearly allocation of the state budget, money needs to be going toward disability services. Because if your elected officials aren't allocating that money that way, whichever committee it is, since I'm not particularly familiar with New York's particular state legislative decision, I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head, but whichever committee it would be, like Ways and Means or something like that, is responsible for writing up the budget each year for the state, making sure that they know that that is a priority. So if the constituent voices aren't there saying we need money going to disability services, whether that's in education for preschool students or whether that's housing vouchers for adults, they're not going to allocate it because they just care about, are they going to be elected next session? And if people aren't clamoring about it, it's not going to be an issue, it's going to be on their radar. And so from that end of it, and yeah, that is more of a long-term way of looking at things. It's not going to patch up the situation in the short term. But it is how you're going to have to look at it in the long term, because if you don't get that money allocated in that direction, you're going to have this problem for years to come.
I think to answer your question about what to do in the case of the parent perhaps being in denial and not recognizing that perhaps the child may need additional support, there's a couple things to consider. First of all, and Lydia may not appreciate this, but sometimes parents do have a hard time accepting.
Well, that's a reality. I've never denied that.
Yeah.
But the reason for this is because of societal prejudice. Is not because the parents are necessarily bad people.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, but the denial process is part of a process that folks have to go through. I went through that. Perfect examples when I made sure I only had 8 of those 16.
My parents went through that too.
You know, no, it can't be, can't be. So that's part of what goes on, and preschool is early childhood. You know, it's not mandatory.
Well, that's exactly it.
It's not mandatory. Parents pay to send their children to private preschools, and you know, and I think that you have to understand and respect that. Certainly, you know, I'm very approachable. You can always share. The parents can come to me and talk to me about it if they have any you know, concerns that they would like to at least probe a little bit. The other thing is that students who are different don't necessarily, you know, maybe they don't really need special services. Maybe, again, to think RTI, to think more of the current mandate that in general education preschools, we can accommodate. And
well, that's what I mean when I say services.
Right, exactly. We can accommodate. We can, you know, we can shift a little bit, and it doesn't, you know, cookie cutter kid, forget it. And so I think that, you know, that it's more work perhaps because you have to learn some new stuff, but I think it's worthwhile because, you know, so what? And I think if a child was truly so unmanageable, the parent would recognize that and look for help too at home, because that's what I get a lot of also. So, you know, I think we really do have to shift our mindset and say, okay, different doesn't necessarily mean the need for special services, but maybe more accommodations, you know, and all of that. And I know that you're
better educated. I mean, it's like
right. And so professional development, of course, that's a big piece of it. But I think that, you know, so there's a couple of things to consider.
Yeah.
And certainly also that parents are expected to go through a denial process. You know, parents go through that when they, you know, when their kid doesn't pass biology. You know, it's like, oh no, not my kid. You know, what do? They get a tutor. But you know, so it's denial is very real and it can be very painful. So I think you have to realize that too. So sometimes, you know, encouraging a parent when the parent's not ready, but I think just kind of presenting to the parent what the child can do, what the child can't do, and then also being mindful and asking your director, give us some tools here. Let's get go to some conferences. Let's have some coursework,
or at least some professional development or something.
Because I think most of us who go into education, we go into it because we love kids, and we want to know how to make them learn, and we want to know how to make them happy and grow and thrive. I mean, that's what we want to do. So I think that from the very early years, that's like the prime time to do that. So again, I say, think, it's a mandate. Think RTI, and that's sort of, will help.
Shameless plug. This summer, July 29th through July 31st, the National Center on Inclusive Education, at which people can receive, I think, 24 hours of continuing education credit. They're holding their summer conference. The title of it is actually When Behavior Gets in the Way, Creating Inclusive Schools and Communities. Shameless plug, I'm keynoting. That's the shameless plug part. But you could go. It's in New Hampshire.
I have a couple of questions. I'm a grandmother of a dual diagnosed grandchild who's Down syndrome and autistic, so it's pretty difficult. But she has a younger sister, and I'm wondering if the sibling needs counseling.
Well, one of the things that's, and you can Google this and you can look into this, and maybe some of the folks to my right have more concrete examples, but there are lots of sibling groups out there. And if you put yourself out there and look.
She's young, she's only 6 years old.
Sibling Leadership Network, that's a really good group.
Yeah, sibling.
What age?
SLN.
But at what age?
I believe that it's a group that's over a broad variety of ages. I'm not incredibly familiar with the specific demographic, but I would look into that organization because I've heard good things about it. And if they're not targeted toward the young age group, I'm sure that they would be able to point you in the direction of resources that are.
Are there local chapters? Do you know what it's in?
I believe so, but I mean it's New York. I'd be surprised if there weren't.
But if you Google sibling support groups, or something like that, and you can start poking around, and then you ask once you get some of that. But that's one of the things that that we always talk about, and that I always disseminate that information when I get that, because a lot of stuff comes by my desk, and I do share with parents. Sometimes it's home management, sometimes it's behavior strategies, sometimes it's toilet training. I mean, there are lots of things out there that parents need help with, and especially if their child is just not doing it on time according to what we expect. And so, but that is a big issue, and that really is. But to say that every child who has a sibling with a disability needs counseling, no, I couldn't say that. But look into sibling groups and support and stuff like that.
I just wanted to say, there's a book, Norn is an only child, so I don't have that issue right now. But there's a really great book called The Other Kid, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it's on my blog. I'm not trying to say shameless plug. AutismWonderland.com.
We're all doing it. We're shameless.
And I did do a book review for it, and it's really nice. It's geared toward maybe like a 3 to 11-year-old, and it's kind of like a workbook. So they have like different questions that they can write in, or coloring activities. So it was a really nice book for really young kids, and it's something that you can do with your granddaughter, or that her parents can do with her, to kind of make her understand her brother, and to kind of let her know that her feelings are important too. It's a really nice workbook, and it comes in English and Spanish.
Oh, another book that's really good that like someone who's of younger age could also read is the book that, what's his face? I see his name all the time. Why am I blanking on it? It starts with an owl. His website, Landon Bryce, that's it. And the book is called I Love Being My Own Autistic Self, and it's a book of like illustrated cartoons. It's written in very simple, straightforward language, but it's a very well done book that kind of explains not only like what it might be like to be autistic, but how autistic people often experience the world around them, particularly in terms of exclusion, and how like we might respond to that. But it's written in such a way that someone who's very young could easily read it too, and it's illustrated the whole thing. Landon Bryce, Landon, his last name is B-R-Y-C-E.
He's the Autcast.
Thoughtcast, yeah, THAUTCAST.com is his website. But the book is called I Love Being My Own Autistic Self.
And there are also groups, for grandparents.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for one more question or comment? Or not? Perhaps from this.
Oh, wait, there's one more person. Hand up.
Back to you. Someone else wants to speak, I'm sorry.
No?
I'm just curious, like, if the child, like, I know we talk about this RTI and how, you know, it's no longer a program, like, it's not a self-contained, a 6-to-1. I understand all that. But the modality in which we deliver academics to a child that's autistic, is there really, I mean, research, what is it shown? For example, the teach modality of delivering service to a child that's autistic in a small, self-contained group versus, I mean, is this something that we're going to look back years later and realize, hey, we're making a big mistake? I mean, this is my concern.
I don't think there is one methodology or modality that works for any student with or without a disability. You know,
but by taking it completely out of the quotient, out of the part, totally, and saying, hey, you know, RTI, and let's be creative, and let's, you know, so the class is a little large. You know, we'll teach one teacher, or maybe we'll throw in another teacher in a group of 20 or 30, or I mean 30. I'm just saying in a large group and making it work. Is that our answer? I think we're I don't know.
And again, I think it's up to the individual buildings and the school districts to really know because every district is different in terms of
what is the
population, in terms of socioeconomics and the needs and the language, and there's so many differences there. In terms of addressing students with autism, the research always has in the last 2 decades really pointed in the direction of, especially in early childhood, more ABA type programs. There is a problem with that because it's training.
It's like training a dog.
It's
turning your child into a real
It's training. It's not teaching. And even with very low functioning folks on the autistic spectrum, that training eventually has to stop, because if there's no generalization, and it doesn't encourage generalization, if there's no generalization, then we need to move. And so, I think the modality, which is really, it's a science, but it really speaks to human behavior, because I work because I get paid, so it's really motivation and doing things because you're motivated. And so that's the whole concept behind, how research has shown us that perhaps in early childhood, the autistic youngsters can learn best. We find what motivates them, we use that like a carrot, and and they don't usually want carrots, but, and we use that to get them to do something that we want them to do. And initially, and I see the value in that in terms of maybe getting students ready to learn. But thereafter, it just seems to me that it has to be more of a natural environment, more of a holistic environment, and I don't know if anyone to my right wants to comment further on that, but there is no one magic methodology or modality. I think you really have to know your group, and the dynamics of the group can also influence, considerably. For me, I look at safety, and I want the children to be happy and learn. That's really what it is. And you're going to do what you have to do for that. But again, your district really has to kind of guide, and they select. And now with the new core curriculum, there is going to be even more impact and more stuff that's going to happen and evolve from all of this. It's ever changing. There are paradigm shifts, and there are just shifts in terms of what we learn and what we find out, what we research. And with RTI, it's all research-based intervention. So presumably, these are things that have been researched, over time and say, okay, this works for teaching decoding. Let's use this if that's where the child struggles. So that's what that's all about.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists. I really appreciate. I really find that having a diversity of opinion and positions creates some of the most dynamic and thought-provoking discussions. I actually almost want to ask that if you wrote a question on that index card, I want them. Even if you didn't ask your question. So I'm so curious to see.
Are you going to interrogate us over email?
No, I will not do that. I promise. Again, thank you all so much. We've hopefully set up light refreshments, a little coffee, a little cookies in the commuter lounge. Please join us. Please greet them and talk to them. And